Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elisabeth GOSSELIN-MALO. I am an international security and military expert. For this afternoon's session, I have the pleasure to be joined by the chairman for the Joint Capability at NATO, Dr. Craig Sawyer, who will first be taking us through a brief presentation on what they do there, and then we'll take it through questions as we go. So the floor is yours, Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you very much for having me here. I want to thank, first of all, the host for hosting this event, inviting me, and I also want to thank all of our sponsors, and as well as all of our industry partners throughout this. Our national defense and our allied defense would not be where it is today. So thank you very much for having me. As discussed, I'm going to go through some slides really briefly, try and get through some of the core fundamentals of who we are, what we've been trying to do as a capability group, as a community, probably for the last 5 years. Then I'd like to turn it back over to some questions and kind of have more of a dialogue on some of this, some of the work we've been doing. So again, real fast though about me, I am a US contribution to NATO. I support the Joint Capability Group for Maritime Unmanned Systems. This is a new capability group stood up under the NATO Naval Armaments Group. So we're one of 5 capability groups that are really trying to promote the allied mission of delivering combined capabilities for maritime unmanned systems. We'll go through some of the mission here in a second, but if we could just go to the next slide, thank you. So I like to start off with making sure we all kind of have the same sight picture of the world. Why is this an imperative? Why must we actually get after maritime unmanned systems? I don't think that's actually a big challenge on this floor to convince a whole bunch of people that AI, autonomy, and unmanned systems have an outsized impact about the future of naval capabilities. But really what I want to do is take a look at how the speed of technology and the rate of technology and change is happening so fast nowadays that it is going so quickly that it is actually outpacing our legacy constructs on how we could actually plan for, deliver, budget, set contracts for, and actually deliver and adopt capabilities that move as fast as autonomy and things that are more in this digital age, vice the old industrial age. We also are entering an area of global interdependence. Still, 90% of the world's commerce and data is actually shipped either across the seas, on top or beneath those seas. We have assets that are now vulnerable to poor actors, bad actors that are actually used to be buried at the bottom of a seabed. So when we look at critical undersea infrastructure, we're starting to look at power lines, cables, pipelines that are actually providing us our commerce and our stability for our civilian lives as well as our military targets. These are becoming increasingly vulnerable to other actors that are now becoming more accessible through the use of unmanned systems. We have peer competitors that are rising and moving at a pace faster than we've actually seen these ever before in our lives. People that are challenging the stability of the oceans are keeping the free lines of sea communication open. These actors are actually eroding our ability to keep stability in the global commons and promote the democracy and the sovereign rule for everybody. We're also seeing a time that we're actually being outpaced. At least in the US, we used to have a nice parity with the amount of investment in R&D that our defense sector actually used to drive. We used to drive more into our research and development through the Department of Defense than through the rest of IRAD combined. That is no longer a case. We're seeing far more investments now with commercial industry outpacing the DoD's investments. We need to become a quick adopter of technologies and where those new systems are coming from. As well as we're also facing an ever-challenging environment on the spectrum of warfare. From gray zone to full kinetic warfare, we're seeing people that are actually on the day-to-day eroding that peaceful presence, harassing fishermen, doing illicit activities and illegal fishing, escalating this violence in a very slow but steady way that we need to be able to respond with not just a high-end kinetic effect. We need to be able to have presence and deterrence on any given day. So next slide, please. So through this, I do challenge us. We have to think about how we're delivering our capabilities more deliberately. We can no longer just bank on a large standing force. We can no longer bank on a blue water navy or an ocean-going vessels. We need to augment our forces. We need to be able to move at pace. To do this, we need to start adopting attritable and risk-worthy systems at scale. We need to operate in a dispersed and distributed way. Not talking about dozens of systems, I'm talking hundreds to thousands of systems working together. With that comes the ability to use machine speed and sense making, the cognition of AI and machine learning to really make sense and use of those thousands of platforms as we go forward. Not only are these going to be overwhelming numbers when we actually employ them against adversaries, but we actually have to be able to handle the coordination of these assets to employ them at scale. We need to have control, and we need to be able to have commander's intent executed across thousands of platforms across an allied context. And of course, we'll be moving these systems into a persistence beyond human limitations. How long can we put these systems to sea? How long can we put them in the environment? How long can we put them on the ocean floor and keep them operating and providing value to us? Next slide. Through that, it's our challenge from the Department of Defense or from the allied stance of NATO. How do we create an environment that allows us to adopt and utilize these systems? We have to really build the environment that allows a rapid refresh and for everybody to contribute to these. Through our typical mechanisms, we can talk about common standard interfaces, whether that's the hardware and the physical platforms. We talk about common data and autonomy libraries. How can we actually build and deploy algorithms and mission autonomy in ways that we can put these on different platforms or share these across allied assets? Then there's the integrated naval tactical grids and our data links. Do we have the common C2 and comms links to be able to control massive amounts of information and assets all at once? Then do we have the control systems? And tied to these control systems, do we have the human beings that are able to understand them and employ these systems? We can't have thousands of disparate and heterogeneous systems and expect operators to be able to ingest new platforms, new capabilities that have own training pipelines or unique assets every given day of the week. If we're going to stay up to pace with the way technology is, and we're going to apply and refresh technologies across the alliance. Then, of course, we actually need to be able to sustain these across the alliance. We need to be able to make sure that they can be husbanded aboard our ships afloat, and as well as recharged and refreshed on those. So, knowing that we have to change the way we look at our force, how we deliver our force, how we design our force, and we have to build an environment to get after this. That's really the foundations of where the Joint Capability Group for Maritime Unmanned Systems began. In 2018, there was a summit in Brussels where ministers of defense, secretaries of defense came together and launched a high visibility project, initially started by 13 allied nations in October of 2018, focused on the ability to rapidly refresh and adopt from an allied context maritime unmanned capabilities into the alliance. This community moved pretty quick for a group. It delivered its first exercise in less than 1 year. We did this through a good partnership with Portugal. They had been going on from about 2015 or 2012 to 2015. There used to be a robotic experimentation and prototyping event there in Portugal, which was Portuguese was the host nation. They had the University of Porto, so academia, obviously industry supporting, and the Center for Maritime Research was those partners there. This really became in 2019. This was one way to keep us honest. As we were trying to build this environment, talk about the standards, talk about tactics, how are we going to prove that we were actually working together and building something forward? So that's when we brought these nations down to this event, and we started partnering with Portugal on delivering nations' contributions in a NATO context towards this endeavor. Next slide. So really the cornerstone of where we've been trying to prove our progress and how we've been working with each other is really the two foundational pieces to this has been our REPMUs for the robotic experimentation and prototyping with maritime unmanned systems. This has been an annual event every year. It's been co-led and co-chaired from the JCG with Portugal since 2019 with us. There was 1 year that we didn't have an event due to COVID, but it has been there every year since. I think this last year we were looking at, when you start looking at the magnitudes, the first year was probably a few dozen systems, a handful of partners. It has grown now to over the 17 maritime nations, I think 3 partner nations, 2 observers. We're talking dozens of warships. We're talking hundreds of unmanned systems, not just in numbers and capacity, but hundreds of variations in different systems being brought together and operated in a common context through several just national gateways, whether the UK, the US, or the CMRE and the NATO-led efforts, we're showing common control and being able to pass control of assets mid-mission, mid-operation between nations seamlessly. This has been amplified in the prior years in 22 and 23. MARCOM has come along, I think as we just heard from some of the MARCOM leadership, but they have really created the NATO MARCOM-led exercise, which has tried to do more operationalization. When you see REPMUs, you see a lot of capabilities coming from shore nodes and virtual ships and trials networks on the shore. Really with Dynamic Messenger, we've tried to create a partnership where this event happens together, one after the other, as REPMUs will lead into Dynamic Messenger again this year in 2025. And the idea is that we'll be pushing more of that control afloat, pushing those out to the ships and out to the standing naval forces, seeing how they can operate and take control of the various assets that we have out there. Next slide. Kind of a little bit of an eye chart, but the big pieces that I want you to see is the vision for us. What was the task given to us from that original piece and context was improve the operational effectiveness, interoperability, and interchangeability of unmanned systems integrated with allied maritime warfighting structures through life from research and development, through the acquisitions to operational deployment. Really, our mission has been kind of distilled down to accelerating through multinational cooperation and innovation the delivery of allied and partnered maritime unmanned capabilities. And when I say capabilities, that includes policy, that includes tactics, that includes the .MLPFP spectrum, making these systems whole, not just a demonstration. Next slide. What I'll do is I'll probably go into a lot of these in the next couple slides, but when I try to set the boundaries, what are we really doing across this? This kind of gives you a very diverse view of what we actually are accomplishing. Really, we needed to create the structure and make sure that we had this community. We had a way to cost share and share information. That's been very important to us to really finalize. The JCG was actually, from that 2018 timeframe I mentioned, was a declaration of intent. The nations were working in an agreement to work towards this community. The JCG was finalized this year in 2024 as a formal capability group working within the NATO construct. I'll cover a lot more of those standards that are going to be critical for us to achieve our aims, including the 4817 standard. I've mentioned how we've been maximizing the OpEx contributions with events like REPMUs and Dynamic Messenger. We also will touch a bit on the strengthening our industry partnerships and working with a lot of you that have common capabilities that are going to multiple nations and starting to work on what do future iterations together look like. We have an effort to actually work and inform and educate our community, whether that's on policy, laws of armed conflict, making sure that we actually have a social compact and understanding of how these systems will operate, whether it's in times of war or it's side by side with commercial and public traffic. We'll touch on the promoting and executing the digital ocean. This is a new strategy. I believe we'll hear a lot from NATO on this if you haven't heard it from here. This is really the cornerstone of where we get thousands of sensors, thousands of platforms. How do we make sense of civil, military, commercial, and government assets and data to make common sense of the maritime picture? We'll touch a little bit on how we're actually also bringing in other piloting of national innovation methodologies and strategies. And then this year is we're really working towards launching the non-traditional sea denial initiatives and projects, which is a lot of what we see leveraging the lessons of what's going on in Ukraine. Next slide, please. Whew. All right, so we kind of mentioned going through this. Where have we been? This slide covers those next few years, but what I want to say is we have made a lot of progress, and we started with a little bit of those lower risk, less complex environments, but still those that lend themselves heavily to the capabilities of where autonomy and unmanned systems and sensors go today. We've had extensive work in the rapid environmental assessment areas, the GeoMeTOC areas, being able to do rapid environmental assessments, the bathymetry, seabed mapping, being able to take that information to a common environment. The next progression of that is naturally is with our mine countermeasures community. You can see some of our COE and our experts there of trying to actually make sense of how do we actually do allied mine capability or mine countermeasures. And we'll touch a little bit, but we've probably made some of the most significant progress in that area alone. Just watching multinational assets working collaboratively together, just from the interoperability to interchangeability aspect. Of course, we've moved up into ISR, IPOE, initial preparation of the operational environment. We've done an ASW challenge, and we're going to continue to work on those, provide more complexity, provide more assets, more nations contributing to NATO shortfalls and capabilities. But in this roadmap going forward, what you'll see is we're adding complexity, we're adding some kinetics, and we're actually starting to move forward into the more complex, both in a policy and a technical standpoint. Working on things that go from that non-traditional sea denial, the digital ocean, where we're going to share information and data across not only government and civilian boundaries, but between national boundaries for the better of the alliance. Then we'll be moving into some of those fires and the counter-air support that you'll actually see until we start talking about some of the long-range fires where some of these more kinetic effects that are going to be more power projection in the longer-term futures. Next slide, please. So I kind of mentioned where is one foundational place. When we start talking about getting hundreds to thousands of systems working together and not overwhelming our operators with the ability to control systems. We've been working for the better part of 3 to 4 years on what's called STANAG 4817. And if those of you that are not looking for this or not aware of this, this is where I'm going to pound a little bit from industry. This should be where a lot of our national partners are driving industry to work with is 4817 is an open standard on multi-domain C2. The ability to control UUVs, UAVs, USVs, UGVs, all from a common model. Doesn't mean that it's going to be a proprietary solution. Each nation can adopt their own version of this software as long as it's going to be compliant. This has allowed us to move very quickly at RepMuse, where I've said we've been able to pass mid-mission mission plans and mission operations and asset control between nations. We've seen everything from the UK putting up a Schiebel, I think from a French company, a Schiebel mid-air, turning it over to the Above Water Working Group, which is, I think at the time, a US C2 node, controls the mission, takes it off station, does its own mission profile, collects the data it needs, turns the asset back over, never returning the asset to a host ship or a host platform, not needing to retrain equipment, not to train crypto, not to be able to pass assets, but to really truly be able to dynamically retask between asset partners. This is one of those foundational pieces. I think as we go through this will be published this year as far as the first one, to be fully adopted and signed out on 2025. And we have a roadmap where we're looking to have several versions to actually be made publicly available for issues like humanitarian aid and disaster relief, where we could work rescue missions with civil and military police, where we could address natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, and disaster relief for search and rescue by using manned civil and military aircraft or assets to be able to aid in those efforts. Next slide. Okay. I did mention the Digital Ocean Project is one of those key initiatives right now in NATO. This is pushing together the idea of having that common maritime understanding of the commons. How do we actually get after this piece? The vision right now, as it is here, is to enhance maritime situational awareness from seabed to space through the ability to orchestrate persistent, agile, adaptive capabilities that concentrate sensing below, on, and above the sea. The exploitation of data at the speed of relevance to increase cognitive capacity of operators, decision makers across all domains through the NATO command structure. What this really fundamentally believes is we are trying to create the one common operating picture of the maritime domain, leveraging every piece of commercial information that's out there, enhancing it with military information, and then being able to actually deploy more sensors or more platforms to cover those areas of weakness. These are going to be seen as one of those critical enablers to being able to combat the critical undersea infrastructure, take away deniability of non-state actors or malicious activity that is going after some of our infrastructure, take away the deniability in the commons to make sure that we have recognition of when people are doing nefarious activities, that the targets are going dark. Give us the awareness and ability to go actually interrogate those targets with higher-end military assets. But we should be able to get a high-end picture from the commercial and already available data across the alliance. Next slide. As mentioned, almost a subset of that is we've been working for about a year. This year we're going to be delivering the first iteration. I think with next year as the final demonstrator in 25 will be the ASW barrier. This is a mobily deployed heterogeneous set of systems, whether that is buoys, UUVs, seabed infrastructure, cables, commercial data, and to be able to have a sense-making picture to actually help aid in the anti-submarine warfare mission operation area. This has been a really strong thing. We've been going pretty good for 12 plus, actually now it is the full 13 nations, with Sweden becoming the official NATO partner. But the work package has been covering everything from concepts, doctrine, maturity frameworks, C2, and interoperability of the data. But you will see these demonstrated at things like RepMuse and other events throughout the year. Have high hopes for this, and this is a really great piece for those of you that are contributing to this. Again, I thank you very much. Next slide, please. So we mentioned some of the industry user groups. What we've seen a lot is reaching out to industry and trying to talk about those next steps. Having those pieces, knowing that the IRAD and the shaping of those companies can actually move faster than a lot of our defense planning cycles and writing of requirements. So we've had a couple groups. We're still standing up more, but what we do is we're focusing on those NATO nations where there's multiple partners investing in common platforms, common equipment. So we both have a Gavia and a Remus user group where we have multiple nations supporting the UUVs. We're promoting the actual users of the operators, the maintainers, and industry coming together a couple times a year to talk about where they're at, where their shortfalls are, what those next iterations of common development, where could they actually get the most value out of this. So these have been really foundationally important to this. I think you'll be seeing a lot more of these kind of come up as we mature this concept. But again, this is, I think, one of those most valuable pieces that we have seen is being able to get to straight to industry partners that are already providing value and making sure that they are getting direct and unfiltered feedback from multiple partners in the same rooms and at the same time. Next slide. I think I'm almost done slides here. So coming back to this policy forum, it's great to have technology. I'm confident in our COEs and our communities for developing the tactics. A little bit more ambiguous is our community's ability to discuss some of those hard challenges like international law. What are those ethical principles of AI? What are those topics of safe navigation, due regard, coal regs? How do we actually address these issues in a forum and in a complex way that will actually document progress? This is still, I would say, honestly, it is mostly at the education and a dialogue stage. I think we have a lot of a lot of our nations have our own independent thoughts and controls in place to do this ethically and responsibly. But it starts becoming interesting when we start operating these systems in other people's waters and other people's territories. Do all of our people understand the laws and how they change, or how the expectations in the social compact of how we will operate these in other people's airspace? How do we maintain those due regard, safe navigation? Is there reciprocity between the countries and belief and understanding that these systems will be safe and adhere to standards? Next slide. And I'm actually going to go to the next and just turn it over to questions because I know that was a huge dump. The biggest pieces that I do want you to take is this is a community that's working towards the whole end from .mlpfp, capabilities, tactics, policies, and technologies. We do challenge ourselves to bring this together in environments that are operationally relevant to prove that we are making progress together, not just an allied community. I support all nations' abilities to go after the priorities they have, any bespoke systems they want to go after. I still want to support and enable those. But this is really talking about bringing the nations together and making sure that there is a common place and a common way that they can work together. At the end of the day, we see a vision of one allied force being able to operate as one, made up of hundreds or if not thousands of systems working together. With that, I turn it over to questions.
Your presentation. So the first question is, you referenced a few exercises, RepMIS being one of them, and how over the years it has evolved to now testing hundreds of platforms in some cases. My question for you would be, how do you qualify that progress is actually being made on the systems that you're testing and fielding?
So we've been employing a lot of different ones. There's been a couple years where we have focused on actually testing the autonomy and the performance of characteristics. I think, though, foundationally where we've gone to make sure that this is something that we're getting value out of is that we actually keep looking at this for how interoperable our nation's bringing in assets, and in that first week, how long does it take us to reconfigure or to bring actual systems into one of the C2 nodes there that's on station? And like I said, typically there's 3 or 4 command nodes that are there. They represent virtual ships, whether that's from Portugal, the UK, the US, and Sia Marie representing a broader NATO and CATL protocol. We want to make sure that those systems that are coming in, whether it's a commercial or a military system, can come in and within a week be brought into one of the command gateways so that a standing naval force can take control of that asset. I think we've been testing ourselves on that. How well can we do that? And then we start pushing those boundaries. How much more complex of a mission can we do? How many more nations can we bring into a multinational, multi-domain operation? How do we actually keep progressing that? We've been doing very well. I mean, again, for the first year or two, it was probably 2 or 3 nations were able to truly pass that command and control. We are up to probably the majority of 11 to about 15 of those 17 active maritime nations are continuously showing up interoperable to interchangeable by day 1 of the exercise. And again, it's up to us to challenge to move into more complex mission areas and try and push those bounds. I think there's a lot more that we're working with ACT and some other partners to bring in some of the autonomy testing and to test that kind of progress. But I don't actually, at RepMuse and Dynamic Messenger, I'm not actually looking to test performance of a platform. I'm looking to test that it's interoperable, that we can actually learn from the tactics and actually develop our understanding of how to employ these systems more than I am worried about an individual platform's performance.
And in your role as the chairman, what would you say are some of the most significant challenges in I guess, in testing, but also in deciding which platforms are worth fielding further?
So in some part, it's easy for me because I don't get to decide. What I am trying to do with the Joint Capability Group is promote the national contributions, get them ready for a stage where they might be able to meet an alliance shortfall, where they could be a credible deterrent or a credible contribution to the capabilities that NATO is requesting of the nations, whether that's a mine countermeasure capability, whether that's an ISR or a harbor protection and security asset. We need to make sure that these are graduating to a point where they are credible contributions and that can actually meet an alliance shortfall. So really our job is to try and promote those best of breeds, bring those tactics to bear, get the observers, get the operators, the COEs to help us develop that best of appetite and understanding of that. And that way that gives the confidence to the nations that this is an investment that is valued not only at their individual level, but at a NATO level.
And if I was to sort of turn that question around and say, where do you see the most, collaborative contribution to maritime autonomy and maritime missions in your role?
I think, as we mentioned, I think some of the most impressive work that I have seen, and I would almost argue that it's probably one of the only places I have truly seen international collaborative autonomy that was executed not from a design feature, but because of an interoperability feature, is from our mine countermeasures community. In the last 2 years, we've seen a couple more increasingly complex sets, but I've been watching from Gavia's, Remus's, and Mark 18, so multinational assets that were brought together. A common mission profile was put into the water. You have the first asset that is doing your mine sweeping and mine-like object detection, dynamically tasking with acoustic comms and relays to the other assets. They would do their own search patterns. They would do their own confirmation of mine-like objects and be able to clear a minefield. I think if it wasn't last year, if it wasn't just this, I think it was actually 23, we saw a clearance rate, I think, that would have taken, if we had those 3 assets working side by side and doing parallel work, I think we saw something of an 18-hour or so clearance rate. We collapsed down to about 6 hours because the systems were actually managing themselves, retasking while underway from a single plan, from a single control station. It's been really impressive to watch that. I'm really trying to challenge the rest of the community to start working in that way of how do you actually have self-organizing robots and autonomous systems working together. That's where we need to move to, but I think it's been an excellent place with our mine countermeasures community.
And you sort of touched on this in one of your slides as well, but what other plans can you tell us that you're planning to build on further for 2025 and the years ahead?
So as we've mentioned, I think RepMuse is a fantastic event, Dynamic Messenger. These are two primarily focused events that will always be on unmanned systems. I see these will be foundational in a continued supporting effort. We are branching out to make sure as we move into higher end or more exquisite missions, there are some things that we need to push into probably a little more controlled or classified context. So moving them into, if they're into fires exercises or EW exercises, we're continuing to move and push into those boundaries as we promote these systems and as they actually show that level of integration at a RepMuse. I think the idea is we would start off-ramping those that are starting to hit that maturity into the more complex, the more exercise-oriented with operational assets where C2 can be accomplished from a float or from the standing naval force. There's also a lot that we're doing this year. We're going to be talking in the next couple weeks on a steering board. But we're also talking about bringing into some of those other innovative forums and exercises. So I know from the U.S. perspective, some of the work that they're doing with the autonomy proving grounds on our West Coast. I think there's silent swarm events that we do on low TRL EW equipment. We're going to be opening a lot more U.S. events back over to our NATO partners and allies, and we're looking to try and promote that even further into the rest of the alliance.
In one of your slides, you mentioned that one of the focus for 2025 is going to be non-traditional sea denial. Can you expand a little bit more on that? Was that, or will that be influenced at all by what we're seeing in Ukraine?
That is, I think, probably one of the... I'm not exactly sure of the origins of the non-traditional sea denial, but it is absolutely the denying of the freedom of maneuver of a larger naval force with asymmetric capabilities. So this is foundational to the lessons that we've learned in Ukraine. How do you actually put a larger force at a disadvantage by using small attritable assets? Again, whether that's decoys, whether that's from adding targeting, whether that's actually putting kinetic packages on these. This is going to be something that has been, I mean, most of the NATO alliance has been supporting. Ukraine is now a formal partner to even the Joint Capability Group as well as higher communities within NATO. But this is actually trying to make sure that we can actually harness some of the terrible nature of what's going on in Ukraine, but a lot of us are supporting. We're trying to feed that back into a loop so that we can all learn from this and that we can all actually improve our capabilities together. So this non-traditional sea denial has a lot of these elements of you still need mission autonomy, you still need payloads, you still need to have that .ml-PFP spectrum to the ability to support, sustain, launch, recover, employ, control, all of those aspects we're trying to work on, trying to create what does that framework look like, not just from an ad hoc and moving very quickly, but from a sustainable and a long-standing force architecture look like.
A topic that has come up a lot in our discussions and earlier today as well has had to sort of been focused around all the benefits that go into working internationally with partners and allies. Obviously, NATO builds a lot on allied contributions. Can we expect even more integration and cooperation between NATO and European forces this year?
I have seen, and while working from the NATO community, I have seen a lot more collaboration. We even include, at this point, what I want to work with the Joint Capability Group is that we don't go astray from some of the larger communities, whether that's EDA or the EU. I know NATO shares the same foundation of working and making sure that we don't get too cross-purpose. In many ways, we're working on similar projects. We should come up with similar means and similar controls. Doesn't mean that it's only a one answer, but where we're different, we should be deliberate about this, and I see this as a foundational partnership. You will see EDA and EU was also present at RepMuse this year. They have a standing invite to our Joint Capability Group as well. I think you'll see a stronger partnership here going forward, but as well as if you actually look at the Joint Capability Group, it's beyond NATO. As we have Australia, New Zealand, Ukraine as all partner nations, observers of Korea and Japan, and we're continuing to get more and more interest from other nations that want to support the alliance perspective and build towards this common goal.
Well, thank you so much for your time. That's going to be concluding our last session, I believe, today. And enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your presence, Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you for having me.